Okay, so the VAAC Harrier program, Vector Thrust Aircraft Advanced Flight Control, was initially an MOD program to look at advanced flight control for short takeoff vertical landing airplanes, obviously looking towards the Harrier replacement. It evolved into a program that was working for Joint Strike Fighter flight control research, and we did some fairly astounding stuff actually as a country with the VAAC Harrier. We really changed the way vertical takeoff and landing airplanes are flown. So the VAAC Harrier was an old two-seat T2, T-Mark II Harrier that was modified and upgraded and given a fly-by-wire flight control system. So at the rear cockpit, you were flying through fly-by-wire. You weren't flying a conventional Harrier. Then in the front cockpit, we had a safety pilot who could take control, which meant that when we developed our flight control software, it didn't have to be safety critical, didn't have to go through the very extensive testing that flight control software normally needs, because of the safety pilot in the front, and we had some other protections as well in the airplane that were software protections that made sure we didn't do anything wrong, even if the flight control system tried to do something really stupid like turn the airplane upside down. Between the automatic monitoring devices and the safety pilot, that would never happen. So it enabled us to make, I mean, it was an incredible tool, enabled us to make very rapid progress in flight control development. And so for all the problems that we have in flying the Harrier and the 8-month conversion course and having to learn to fly from scratch again, and the problems I described with hovering the X-35, with the F-35 that took all that Harrier work that we'd done on the VAAC Harrier, it's now so simple that a teenager can fly it without any training. We had a TV presenter, science correspondent for ITN News, came and flew the VAAC Harrier with the experimental software. He doesn't even have a driving license, and he was able to fly, decelerate, hover and land the airplane. And we've got a clippage of that if you wanted to put it on your page. I'm sure you could get it off ITN. And so we've made what is fundamentally the most difficult flying task in aviation, except perhaps carrier aviation, and we've made it now one of the simplest flying tasks in the F-35, all through the technology we were able to develop on the VAAC Harrier. Yeah, so I did a few weeks at sea, operating from Invincible class carriers, initially in the GR7. So I actually, in fact, before I was a test pilot, I was on an operational evaluation unit trial, and have the dubious and little known honour of being the first ever Harrier to launch off Invincible class carriers. But not a great claim to fame. But then as a test pilot, I've done a number of embarked trials in the VAAC Harrier. So we were looking at, very important when you're developing these advanced flight control technologies for the Joint Strike Fighter. Well, obviously they're not just for landing ashore, you need to be able to land at sea as well. And the environment on a carrier is quite different for a number of reasons. First of all, the deck's moving, potentially, in rough weather. And also the piloting task is quite different because you're much closer you've got superstructure, you've got deck just 30 feet beneath you. And so for various reasons, the gain of the response of the human being in that environment is quite different. And you need to be able to make sure the flight control software was going to be well suited for that environment too. So we did a lot of testing on both HMS Illustrious and Invincible, flying the VAAC Harrier with the experimental flight control laws and testing again different flight control strategies and finding out which was going to work for the best so that we could then incorporate it in the Joint Strike Fighter. In addition to that, we also looked at a new manoeuvre. So one of the last jobs we did on the VAAC Harrier was looking at something for which the Harrier doesn't do, which we call a ship rolling vertical landing. So a ship RVL, or roller vertical landing, is one where you've got a very low forward speed. You're nearly all supported on the engine, about 60 knots airspeed or so. But there's enough wing lift at that speed, in the thousands of pounds of wing lift, to be able to bring back some useful additional payload that you wouldn't be able to carry if you had to do a pure vertical landing without any wing lift at all. And this is a manoeuvre that is, as I said, brand new to the Joint Strike Fighter. We don't do it in the Harrier. We do land-based RVLs, but not on a ship. And there's a lot of, I could talk for a long time if you wanted me to, a lot of ins and outs about how to do it, and particularly if the deck's moving a lot, how to control the airplane safely down onto the deck. And so we simulated that in the VAAC Harrier with flight control response, just like the Joint Strike Fighter. So we could look at the task and look at different visual landing aids, different ways for the pilot to guide himself down using a visual landing aid that we came up with, a guidance system in lights, essentially, that we invented for the task, and we evaluated that as well. And that was actually the last thing that the VAAC Harrier did before it was retired at the end of 2008, after a long and distinguished research career and a job well done.
So did you enjoy being part of that programme?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, again, I've been very fortunate in what I've had to do as a test pilot, a cutting-edge research project over many years, which I was fortunate to become the focus of. I was able to stick around long enough and run the programme both as a project pilot in the late 90s, but then as the senior development pilot as a civilian. It was tremendously rewarding because not only was the science interesting and exciting, a research program of that nature is very interesting to be involved with, but it was also a very important program. We knew what we were developing was going to go into the Joint Strike Fighter, into the F-35, and be flown by young pilots for years to come. Hopefully keeping them safe or not. I mean, many people have crashed airplanes in the past, and the harder the airplane is to fly, the more people you lose through the life of the airplane. And so the work we were doing was important, so it was challenging from that perspective. It was fascinating, and it was very rewarding flight test research at the cutting edge. So I've been very, very fortunate.